Oh, welcome back. So if you remember in the last video, just quickly doing a quick summary, we actually set up our raycasting. We set up our aiming ray, we set up our range to be short. So when we looked at the door, it came up down in our console window saying that it had actually detected the entrance. So just to show you just quickly, I'm looking at the cave entrance. Now, the problem is because it's in the console window, it's not giving the user any feedback. So we need to be able to give that user feedback. The way we're going to do it is we're actually going to use a GUI texture object. So we're going to go to Game Object, Create Other, and GUI Text. So not GUI Texture, sorry, GUI Text. And what you'll see is you won't be able to see anything once that's created. However, that's in the scene window. If you select over the game window, all of a sudden you'll see this GUI text because it will only appear in the game, not our scene. So the very first thing we're going to do is I'm just going to rename it in the inspector, and I'm going to call this one Interactable GUI Text. Just so I know what it is, and hit enter to save. The very next thing, my text, I'm just going to be placing down, press E to enter. So very simple. The anchor, we're going to just go middle center, and the alignment is going to be center as well. That basically, having middle center and center, sticks it dead center on the screen. Otherwise it starts in the center and then has that left anchor. We're not going to be playing around with the font or material, but feel free to. And the color I might actually go through and change to an aqua style. You guys pick whatever works for you. The other thing you can play around with is your font size, just to make it large enough by changing that number. And we're going to take that one down and drop our Y value so it's at the bottom half of our screen. So I've got 0.2. So from here, what we need to do is we now need to go back into our code of our aiming ray. We have this interactable GUI text set up, and we just need to use our aiming ray script. So if we just double click on our aiming ray script that we wrote earlier, and once MonoDevelop opens, we can actually go through, and we've got our script from before. And what we want to happen is we want to replace our console message, I'm looking at the cave entrance, to actually replace what that GUI text says. So just here is, this displays to the console. And the reason why it displays the console is it is a debug. It's for the developer, it's not for the player. So what we actually need to do is we need to take this I'm looking at the cave entrance to something that the player can actually interact with. So the very first thing that we're going to do is we're actually going to create a couple of variables that we can actually use that GUI text before. So if you remember, we've set up this press E to enter, so we're designing it for the keyboard. So when the player looks at the door, it will come up with this message saying press E to enter, and eventually when they press E, it will load our cave and that new scene, which is what we're after. So I want it to show the message, press E to enter. When looking at the cave entrance. So to actually do this, we're going to use a couple of things. The variable that I was talking about before is for that GUI texture. So I'm actually going to go through var GUI text. And I actually need a variable name if I'm programming correctly. So that variable name, let's call it interact text, and define it as a GUI texture. So that's the name of the variable, interact text, and that's the type of object it is. And with a semicolon. Now that interact text, what I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to come down here and say interact text is equal to it works. I am looking at the cave entrance. So what we've actually done is we've got just an interact text here, but there's something missing. We actually need to place down and go text. So we actually can define this, what part of this game object it is, or this GUI texture it is, we need to define it's this section here, this text section. So we have to say what our GUI texture is, dot text, and what it's going to be equal to. We're just going to save that by pressing Control S and going back to Unity. Now the next couple of things that we need to do is we need to go to our first person controller and have a look at our aiming ray script. And you'll notice that there's now a new field called interact text, which is the name of our variable, and it's looking for a GUI text. So I'm going to select the little dropper, and you'll see that in my scene window I've got interactable GUI text, and I can select that. If you can't find it through the menu, you can easily just drag and drop. It does the same thing. So from here, I'm just going to save my project by pressing Control S, and you guys should always be constantly saving. I save a lot more often than you actually say. Just quickly play test, and let's see what happens. So it's got press E to enter, not what the message I said. Remember I said I'm looking at a cave or something along those lines. I'm still not looking at that entrance door, but as soon as I look at that entrance, it changes, which is great. Now the only problem is when I look away, it's no longer true. So we've got to get rid of that message when I'm not looking at the door. So to get rid of the message when we're not looking at the door, we need to constantly clear it. So to clear it, at the very start, we actually have our default message. Press E to enter, just like that. That's what it appears before we look at the door. So let's first off clear that one up. So in my code, I'm actually going to go through is equal to open quotation and close quotation. Now, what does that mean? Well, usually, if you have a look at these ones down here, we have an open quotation and a close quotation, and then we have all the words in between them, and that's a string. If we actually have the word hello here, we still have the word written there, and we know that that's a string or text. If I get rid of the word, I still have the open quotation and the close quotation. However, there is no actual words in between it, which means it's blank. So if I save that, go back to Unity and hit playtest, you'll see that press E to enter, as long as I don't actually make an error, which I have, and line 2. So what we're going to do is we will actually leave that one blank for the moment, and the reason why that actually occurred was the same reason down here. We haven't told it what part of it it is equal to, so GUI text has to be this. So I'm actually going to do that in a slightly different way. I'm just going to create a function. And it's going to be the start function. So when the game starts up initially, I'm going to call this one. So I'm going to go interact text dot text is equal to open quotation for the exact same reason and semicolon. And what that will do is once the game starts up, it knows exactly what it's looking at and what part of that it needs to change. So let's save that and play test. Clear out my errors and hit play. And you'll see that that word disappears. But as soon as I look at that door again, it doesn't clear again. So I still got to get rid of it clearing. So what we can actually do is we can actually be constantly calling another update function. So the update function is something that happens every frame. The function that we're going to use is fixed update. Now, fixed update is a little bit different in the way that it works, and we'll go into this one a little bit later. Usually fixed update is used for physics-based items to make sure that they're occurring properly. So what we're going to do is we're going to use that exact same line. So we're going to have it constantly overwriting each other. So this is constantly going to be ticking over and clearing the text. This is constantly going to be ticking over and adding this text here. So from that, what we're going to do is let's just save it, see what happens. So nothing's appearing, which is good. Look at the door, which is good. And I'll look away and it's no longer looking at the cave entrance. Okay, so we're almost there. Okay, the very next thing that we've got is it comes up with our message and this actually clears our text. So this fixed update ticks every frame or around that. We'll talk about this function a little bit more in detail later or in a future lesson. But this is constantly trying to clear it And when we are looking and casting that ray of that range at our entrance tag, it's going to replace it with this message. So let's actually start changing the message to make it do what I actually want it to do. So it says press E to enter. So let's press E to enter. Now I could say the cave. Actually, I will. However, if you wanted to use a script on multiple things and have multiple entrances, you'd probably just have press E to enter, so it's a little bit more generic that can be used everywhere. I'm going to save that, and I know that that one's going to work, so I'm going to add something else in at the same time. So when I'm actually looking at the door, I want to be able to see if E is being pressed. But I only want it to happen inside if this is occurring. So it's actually here is when I need to stay, check to see if the letter E is pressed. If it is, do something. So we need to check to see if that E is pressed. So we're going to come up with an if statement and go through and write if input dot get key and we could do a couple of things. But let's say get key E. Then what we want it to do is just a debug.log, just so we know that the button's actually being pressed. E was pressed. Now the other thing that we want to do is we actually want to go through and just turn off this one for the moment. So by placing the two slashes, it's actually going to comment it out. The code's not going to run, just so it doesn't clog up my console window. As you can see, there's quite a few.